Hey, Codey, welcome to the Interrupted Podcast, brother. I appreciate you taking the time to come on the show.
Yes, sir. Appreciate you having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Man, I've followed you a bit here on social media for, I don't know, I guess it's been a couple months, and just seeing what you're doing, and obviously all your involvement with Echelon Front and all the work that your team is doing to promote leadership. And then what really caught my eye is through social media, just how you engage so well and want to show a positive message about being a father as well. So I just, as soon as I had the opportunity to reach out to you, I had to do it. And then ironically, right about that same time, your team launched the first responder webinar that you put out, and I actually got to see you in action at work doing your thing and on the virtual. So man, again, just welcome. It's good to have you on.
Yes, sir. Appreciate it. Yeah, it's kind of crazy. I didn't have social media for about 10 years, probably since 2010.
Oh, wow.
When I got in the military, they kind of sprayed us from there, like, we don't really want you on here, kind of giving away information, because 18, 19-year-old kids, they get kind of dumb. They start leaking stuff that shouldn't be said. And at that time, I was like, okay, well, that's fine by me. And then once I came aboard Echelon Front, they were kind of pushing, like, it makes sense for you to have a social media presence because people want to know who they're talking to, know what you're about. And then on the contrary with that, my wife is always about taking pictures of the kids and memories, which I've never been that way. And so once I started doing social media and getting on board and sharing kind of what my family's doing, my kids are doing, what my work's doing, it just makes sense. And so, and it makes sense because I get to connect with people like you and people that have lost relationships over the years. And so social media, most people kind of think negatively on it, but it's been really good. And I'm glad I'm kind of getting back into it.
Awesome. Do you have a lot of people that are engaging with you in a good way, and that you can have a dialogue with people over? Are you primarily using Instagram? I saw you on some other accounts.
Yes, sir. Yeah. I mean, I know there's so many out there.
Yeah.
I only have so many hands to juggle stuff. So
I hear you, man. It's good.
Instagram is my main one. But yeah, I mean, people always reaching out, regardless if it's in fitness with stuff about being a parent or about work related. It's a revolving door where I'm always open to kind of help where I can.
Right on. Well, how was 2020 for you and your family, and moving through that? And as we're into this new year, I mean, how have you been, aside from the business end? Have you guys got through, between child rearing, child care, and schooling, and just your relationship in general with your wife?
Yeah. So, I mean, 2019 was pretty crazy because I started full bore Echelon Front January 2019.
Okay.
So I started traveling a lot. I was doing like 2 weeks out of the month for our field training exercises. And at the time I had my oldest, who was 2, and then our about to be 1-year-old. And so me being gone all the time put a lot of stress on the wife. And so 2020 came around, my wife was pregnant again, and our daughter was born in February. And she's trying to balance, like, okay, how long are you going to be gone? And then COVID hits. And at first I'm like, shoot, like, what are we going to do? And we transition to online stuff. And I mean, it's a blessing now because, I mean, all 3 of my kids are right through this door. So if you hear some craziness, that's them.
It's all good. That's real.
Exactly. And so I can be on a call, I can do a training, and then I can go check on the kids, go help where I can. So that's been super beneficial. Not for me, but more for my wife, because I know when I'm gone and I FaceTime her and things are just going crazy, I'm like, man, I wish I could be there to help. But my wife's awesome. She's on board. She knows my mission, and we're aligned. And so I think that's the biggest thing there, is that we're on the same page with what I'm doing at work and then what she wants out of our kind of family life. So yeah, 2020 was rough, but I'm glad that I can be home and kind of work through this, because now we got a 3, a 2, and a 1-year-old, and it's full game around here.
Yeah, right on. No, I enjoy seeing what you're putting out there. You guys are an active family, and it's awesome to see, man. Just that it's one thing, the messaging that comes out, but you have to see some pretty cool things develop in your children, and just your relationships in general, with that become more of a cohesive unit almost as you go through, just whether it's you're out in the wilderness or around the house playing, engaging that, and what's being built there is pretty phenomenal. Have you seen benefits from that?
Yeah, you know, a lot of people ask me, they're like, well, when do you have the time to, like, get out? Because I'm trying to balance so much stuff. And with the 3 of them, it's tough. I mean, just getting in the car is like a 45-minute routine, but it just makes it so worth it when we get out and we're going, like we do a lot of hikes, we're doing a lot of travel, going to the beach. I mean, California, say what you want about it, but I'm an hour and a half away from the mountains, from the snow, from the ocean, from wherever. Yeah. And so we just pick up and go. We try to go every weekend and do something to get out, because the kids are just, it's a 180 from being indoors, locked inside. They're trying to watch shows and it's just going crazy. And then we get outside outdoors and it's like a light switch, and they're so calm and so peaceful. They're engaging with the environment, kind of learning and whatnot. And so I realized that, yeah, it may be hard for me and my wife to like get out of the house and get going. But once we're out there, the kids just love it. And here's the thing too, is what a lot of people don't realize is, yeah, the kids, they're not going to remember this like in a month or two. Like this last weekend, my wife was in Arizona, so I had the boys by myself, the 3 and 2-year-old. And yeah, it would have been a lot easier to stay at home, but I went out, we did 3 hikes, and I took my 3 and 2-year-old on a 5-mile hike. And yeah, it was crazy. And they probably won't remember that in a month, but I'll remember that. And that's what I'm going for, is making these memories, because I'm gone a lot. And so when I'm home, I want to make the most of it. And so the more I can get out and bring them into kind of what I like to do, the better off I feel that we're going to be.
100%, man. Yeah, that's the human side of it that is so important. And while, you know, on our side of social media, we get to see that, but there's so many dynamics and lessons that maybe the memory won't be there for them, but I can only imagine the developmental growth that's happening because of those engagements. So man, I just encourage you, and I keep it coming, because it's cool to see. It's inspiring. I know for other fathers that are trying to juggle things, not that we necessarily always have to have the perfect balance, because I don't think that's actually a thing. I think it's more of prioritizing what needs to be done and where we're going to choose to spend our time. That's pretty intentional. So I see that. So that's awesome, man. Would you take us back a little bit and give us a little context for where you grew up? And I'd love to hear a little bit about your military experience. But before we go into that, would you just share where you grew up and what kind of family of origin that you come from, and some of the principles and foundation morals and ethics that were instilled in you as a child and young man?
Yes, sir. Absolutely. So I grew up in a small town in Northern California called Loomis. So pretty tight knit group. I mean, my high school was probably like 1,200. I know that's not too small town, but I grew up rural enough to where you're seeing cows and horses and whatnot. And I'm close enough to the city where I can get a little bit of that action too. But growing up, man, I thought I had it all. My father, police officer, he's still a police officer now, going on like 26 years.
Wow.
My mother was stay at home for the first part. And then when we kind of grew up, she got into the real estate world. And so I grew up always watching my parents work day in, day out. Hardworking Americans is what I like to say. Yeah. To the point where my dad's coming off a shift to my football practices in his full uniform. And I still have a picture of that. And that just like instilled this concept of hard work, and that it never stops as a parent. And that's something that I try to focus on, is you really don't get a break. But the reality is, like, it's not about you anymore. And so I saw that day in and day out, and I'm glad that I pulled that from my parents now that I'm a parent. But yeah, so grew up. I mean, we weren't rich by any means. We weren't poor, kind of middle class. I was fully engulfed in the sports world. I was the kid that could tell you the starting lineup of every NFL football team, baseball, basketball. I was that kid, always wearing jerseys, always out and about, always outside. That was me. And that pushed me down my path of, I wanted to be a professional athlete. And now I was a little naive and I didn't really know what that entailed. And sadly for me, I kind of got away with not having to try a lot in sports and in school. I could just kind of show up and get things done in school and in sports. And so that kind of put me down a negative path, to the point where after graduating high school, I thought I was going to go play college. I weighed like 150 pounds. And so that wasn't really large, but I still wanted to do it. That was my dream, my passion. Right. And so I went on to play community college down south. And then I was going to transfer over to a D1. Right after that time, I was about to transfer. I blew out my knee. So MCL, ACL, meniscus, in my right knee. And I was kind of bummed. I didn't really know what to do. I thought this was my only plan in life, that I wanted to go play in the NFL, and it was crushed.
Yeah.
So I kind of went into a dark mode and kind of cast family out, cast friends out, was pretty self-destructive. And then at that time, I had a lot of my friends and family coming back that were in the military, coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan, and just talking about the things that they've seen, the buddies that they've lost. And it put things in perspective to me, that I'm sitting at home crying about a problem with my knee, crying about not being able to play sports, which it's a gift to be able to play sports. It is. But the calling you get to go to the military, I never had that. But once these guys got back telling me about the things that they were going through, it immediately changed my direction in life. And my thought was, I thought, well, listen, if I enlist, if I'm able to go overseas and maybe save one person's life, it's 100% worth it. And so that was my new mission. I cast everything away. I literally walked into the Marine Corps recruiter's office on crutches after surgery. And he's like, wow. Look, I can't touch you for like a year. And I was like, well, look, I want to go. I want to go right now. This was 2010, August, and I couldn't go until August of the next year. And I ended up leaving like 2 months later in October. Wow. I rehabbed the crap out of it. My knee still hurt. I just kind of hit it. And I went into boot camp with still kind of a messed up knee, but I pushed as hard as I could. I graduated first out of my class. And then out of like the 600 in our whole entire company, I was second. And so that kind of put me on the path of becoming a leader. I would never call myself like a natural born leader. It was kind of thrust upon me, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. I understand that people, they have leadership capabilities, but leadership is a skill. And so you can learn those things on how to kind of lead other people. And I learned that from day one. I got thrown into a leadership position and I loved it. The reason I loved it is because, well, this is my ego talking, but I got to tell people what to do rather than people tell me what to do. And that stuck with me. And I loved that feeling. I loved being in control, and I loved being able to kind of influence and kind of tell people what to do, because, well, I thought I was like the smartest one in the room, the fastest, et cetera, which is going to bite me in the butt down the road. But regardless, enlisted in the Marine Corps in 2010. I spent some time on the East Coast in Virginia. And then I pushed out to Oahu, Hawaii, which was a horrible transition from Virginia. Don't recommend that, by the way.
Yeah.
But that was an amazing experience, heading out to Hawaii. I actually had never been before I pushed out there. I was out there for 3 years. I was in infantry, so I was a grunt, kind of the ground unit. And the whole concept, especially in the Marine Corps, is misery loves company. So if you're not crying, if you're not like bitching about what's going on, then you're not having fun. I mean, that's the model that the Marine Corps uses. But in those times, I mean, that's where you're making the bonds, you're making the friendships that you'll never forget, is when you're doing that hard work that nobody wants to do. And I'm thankful that I got to go through that, because I constantly find myself now trying to fill that void that I once had of trying to make like a crappy workout to where I'm actually destroying myself, when I actually got to do that for free and like with people. That's something that I miss most about the military.
Interesting.
And then, yeah, I got out in 2015. I only spent 5 years in. I kind of got to the point where I was in a high enough leadership position where I was getting pulled away from the front line. So I was kind of doing the admin work, and that's not what I wanted. I wanted to pursue other options. But yeah, I don't regret anything about the military. Looking back now, I miss it, and I kind of wish I stayed in, but it's always 2020, because at the time when I was in, I was like, I can't wait to get out.
Right. Yeah. Well, when you were even going back into high school and so active in sports, how did you deal with leadership and authority between even coaches and the team dynamics? Because obviously for teenagers, that is a huge ego time, right? And some people never grow out of that we see. But when you reflect back on that time, what was your style, and what can you see now that you have the opportunity to understand better what your role was when it came to being a leader in those environments, because you were an exceptional athlete?
Yeah, as a kid, I was relatively quiet until I had like an authoritative person, a coach, not necessarily my parents, because as most people know, you can only hear so much from your parent before you start to tune it out, which in reality, my coaches were saying the same things my parents were saying, but I was listening to them anyways. But it wasn't until like my coaches gave me the insight, like that I get to control my own destiny. And so a lot of times we talk about kind of like self-imposed discipline. That's what my coaches were trying to instill with me. Because if coaches are always trying to be the hammer, like the kids aren't going to listen. But if you can instill in the kids, what my coaches instilled with me is like, I have the choice. I have the choice to get better. I have the choice to stay late. I have the choice to do extra work in practice or et cetera. That went a long way because I was in control. I was the one actually making the decision rather than it being fostered by something that's higher up than me. And so I took that on board. And so I was a leader during sports kind of my whole life. I mean, not necessarily like a military leader where you're kind of telling people what to do, but it was where people were looking up to me on what to do. And so a lot of times what I fostered my leadership ability was leading by example. Because when you're 17, 18, even younger, like you can't really tell other kids what to do because a lot of conflict's going to arise. But if I'm the one that's showing up early as a leader of a team, kids are going to be like, oh, well, Codey's coming in early. Maybe I should come in early. I see what's transcribing him coming in early to the field. I like that. I want to do that. Oh, he's staying late in the weight room. Maybe I should do that. And so that's what I always tried to do. I couldn't really tell people what to do because that's not what I was about at that time. In the military, that definitely switched because that's what I kind of turned into. But I mean, any way I could influence somebody who's a kid now, maybe listening to this. I mean, if you have the ability to lead by example, that is huge growing up and getting into high school sports and whatnot. Yeah, that's kind of my leadership ability as a kid growing up through the sports world.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, even coming in contact with the realization that, okay, I'm not going to be the professional athlete, right? And as I hear people's story, these are moments that stick out. Obviously, for me, with the Interrupted podcast, what are these interruptions in life that we have a choice, right? Or the crossroads, people say, that I have to find within myself the ability to understand my gifts and move forward in that moment. And as you shared about having these contacts with different people that were coming back from the war and telling you these experiences, how did that switch go? Or how did that realization that I need to do something beyond football at this point because that's just not in the cards? Were there some tough days that you reflect on and like, hey, this is what made me make this choice. This is the catalyst for change in this moment as a young man?
Yeah, I mean, for me, when I think about crossroads, because I mean, everybody hits crossroads throughout their lives. Often the problem is that when we hit a crossroads, when we're trying to go one way, is that we don't have that secondary or tertiary route. When we don't have that in place, then we get a little self-destructive. I wasn't going to play football, and that was like, that's all I wanted to do. And so when that wasn't going to happen, I didn't know what to do. And so I got super self-destructive. I was getting involved with drinking and doing stuff I wasn't supposed to be doing. I was 18 years old. I didn't have a lot of guidance. I was away from my parents. I was away from any kind of role models or mentors that pushed me in the right way. And it wasn't until I had that outside contact from people that I respected, people that I looked up to. It was cousins and it was best friends from high school that came back. And so once I got engulfed in them, and I mean, I'm sitting here, I'm doing all these things wrong, and these guys are coming back, actually doing something with their lives and making a difference. I was like, wow. I was like, and I literally can remember, I'm like, what am I doing? I was sitting down in my dorm room. I'm like, what am I actually doing right now? Like, what is my purpose? It's obviously not to go to the NFL anymore. What do I want to do now? And just hearing those stories from influential people, it was easy. I was like, okay, that's what I'm going to do. And then next day I was in the recruiter's office.
Yeah, that's pretty exceptional to just have the initiative to go do that in that moment. Now, once you were in the military and starting to get these leadership roles, were you doing well with the roles, or were people just following your orders and it wasn't creating a problem and things weren't highlighted? At what point did you encounter the fact that, hey, maybe the way I'm doing it isn't right? And I'm curious, more or less, what those symptoms of that were. Was it pushback from other people? Was it a mentor higher up in the chain talking down to help grow you? How are you being hit that you start to have a transformation that I need to do things differently, that I can only imagine starts to propel you in the direction that you're now at and the things that you're learning now?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's actually twofold. So a lot of my time in the military, I was always the peer being elevated. And I personally, I feel like peer leadership, that's the hardest thing. Because if me and you, we're the same age and we have the same experience, why should I listen to you? Like, we've done the same exact things. And so that was the hardest thing for me to do. And so I had to balance. With yelling at people and telling them what to do. And then on the flip side, I'm like, okay, well, I was like just your friend. Like, we're going out on the weekends. Like, where do I draw the line? And the line was drawn when people would start to take advantage of my generosity, of my friendship. They'd start to show up late and they're like, oh, well, Codey, he's my boy. Like, I don't really have to do what he says. Like, he's okay with me kind of slacking off. And so that was hard for me to kind of gauge that, because I'm like, okay, well, these are my friends, but I don't want to be too hard because then they're not going to listen to me. And so the whole leading by example, like, that only went so far. And so, and then I kind of transitioned. I started to model what my mentor leaderships did in the Marine Corps. Marine Corps is very alpha male. It's very rock, paper, rank. It's, I outrank you. You're going to listen to me. It's very top down, short and sweet. And so it's a lot of yelling. It's a lot of screaming. It's a lot of like beat down sessions is what we call them, to where you're getting PT'd for not doing what you're supposed to be doing. And so I had to figure out, okay, this isn't working. What do I need to do next? If I stayed down that same path, I was going to get nowhere with my guys. I was eventually going to get trampled by them because they weren't respecting me. They weren't listening to what I was saying. So I was far left, but now I was pushing far right because I was kind of letting them go, but now I'm like down their throats. So I was on the extremes. It wasn't until I went down both paths that I realized that I needed to be in the middle. And sometimes that's what you have to go through. You have to feel both extremes of a situation, of your actions, to understand like, okay, whoa, that definitely didn't work and this isn't working. Maybe I can combine a little bit of the two and kind of stay in the middle. And so, and I'll lead to this story, kind of where I figured out the right extreme of yelling at people. I was out in Hawaii. So I was an E5. I was a platoon sergeant at the time. So I was in charge of 30 other Marines. And these Marines are maybe a year younger than me. I rarely have more experience than them, but I just was constantly getting put in leadership positions from what I was doing in schools, kind of my reviews, my proficiencies and conduct marks. I was always getting put in that position. And what I started to do was I started to control everything for my guys. And so before you deploy, you have to go down to 29 Palms down in California, and you go to do kind of like a pre-mission checklist. Is your platoon ready to deploy overseas? And so you're going through all this crazy scenarios. And I remember the first time I was in charge of all these guys, and we're pushing down this ravine, and there's just kind of one little building at the bottom of this. It's almost like a cul-de-sac, but it's a big dirt mound. And there's just one building. There's a couple cars outside. And this is my first thing, and I want to like show that I know what I'm doing. Sadly, I make every single decision for like all 30 of my guys. And so we're pushing out, and one of my guy, he hits like a fake IED pressure plate and he blows up. So now he's kind of down man over here. And I'm like, shoot. And so I'm yelling at all 5 of these guys. I'm like, okay, stay there. Don't move. Don't move until I tell you what to do. Bad idea. Those guys stay put. I start pushing all my guys on the other ridge line. Boom, they hit another pressure plate. So now those guys are down. And so now I have 10 guys out of the fight. And so there's 20 of us. And I'm still trying to assault this mission. But essentially, I'm trying to do it all by myself because I'm the one telling every single person what to do. And so we started to push toward this building. And the training down there is ridiculous. They're bringing in people from Hollywood, like amputees that are missing limbs. And then the car blows up, and then guys are running out with missing limbs and everything. It's just went from zero, and now we're up here, pandemonium. And so I get up to the point where I'm laying down on the amputee, trying to put a tourniquet on him, a mock tourniquet, and I'm all by myself, and I don't realize this half the time. And I'm actually like so zoned in, so in my own head on this person that's down, that every single person behind me, they got killed off by the instructor cadre. And I'm still yelling at them, even though I can't see them. But I so want to make a point that I know what I'm doing, that I'm trying to handle every situation on my own. Eventually they index the exercise, and they really don't have to say anything. They kind of tell me like, Gandy, all right, step up. He's like, turn around. And I turn around, and like all 30 of my guys are about like 100 yards back.
Jeez.
And I'm like, shoot. He's like, yeah. He's like, you got to go get them all, and you got to bring them back to the LZ. So I spent like an hour and a half carrying all my guys one by one to the LZ. And sadly, that's what it took to kind of humble me, to realize that I didn't have it all figured out, was kind of like that physical exercise of carrying all 30 people. But it was that extreme scenario where if I wasn't put in a training environment, God knows what would have happened, what I would have done overseas if I never learned that in a kind of training environment. So it sucked at the time, but I'm really glad I went through that, because that allowed me to balance kind of the two extremes of being kind of the pushover and being the hard ass, is being somewhere in the middle and kind of influence your team to make decisions on their own, is where I wanted to be. And ultimately that happened for me, luckily.
Wow. Yeah. What I hear in that is, and I think it happens to a lot of us, I can think of examples in my own life where as a leader, we're chasing credibility, especially early on, and we get tunnel vision so badly. And I think at the core, we're trying to do the right thing, whether we have the knowledge or don't have the knowledge. But do you think, were you very aware that when you were saying you were moving to these extremes, that like when you were getting too far, could you feel that? Or was it only when you hit the extreme that you realized, hey, something's got to give here?
I think for me, it wasn't until I hit the extreme, because no one ever kind of called me out and told me what I was doing was wrong. And so I basically had to learn it on my own, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. But it would have saved me a lot of time and effort if someone that I respected, maybe a peer, maybe another leader, or maybe even one of my subordinates, they're like, hey, Sergeant Gandy, like this isn't working. Like what you're doing is going to lead your team, maybe get guys killed eventually one day. If I had that conversation a lot earlier, I would have been extremely thankful, because unfortunately for me, I was stubborn. I was trying to prove a point. I was trying to prove that I was a good leader, and I got tunnel vision every single day. And so I had to learn the hard way that what I was doing was wrong. So yeah, if I had to pick, I would much rather have someone step in that I respect and be like, listen, what you're doing is not working. Maybe we should try this. I'd be like, okay, cool. But stubborn, hard-headed, I had to learn the hard way, and sometimes that's what it takes. Yeah.
Now, did you see a lesson like that translate on the battlefield where you were able, was there any specific example where you were able to step back and say, whoa, hold on, I got guys that I don't have account for in this moment, and I need to regroup and not be, just step back and be able to take a broader perspective of what's going on the battlefield? Did that lesson translate tangibly to you or for you?
I don't necessarily think in that space. I think once I did the switch, once I started to see my guys actually doing the right things without my direct impression on them, that's when I was like, well, what I was doing was wrong. It's when I was giving my team the ability to kind of make their own decisions. Hey, they enter a building by themselves. There's 4 of them, and now they're taking down the building, and I'm not like barking orders over the radio, and they're doing all by themselves. And I'm like, wow, like this is actually a lot easier. And that's the greatest part about it, is once my team, like once my Marines started to do their own things in their own space, it took a lot of pressure off me. Like the weight was just, it was gone, because I wasn't doing 30 people's jobs. I just had my own job. And like as a leader in the infantry in that environment, my job wasn't to be in the rooms with them all the time. My job was to be back and to be outside and be like on the radio, calling for support, logistics, more manpower, et cetera, talking to hire. And until I actually saw that translate on the battlefield, like, hey, like this is actually easy now. Like I don't really have to do much. I'm just your support guy. But that was the hardest part for me, because I always wanted to be the one. I always wanted to be the first one in the stack. I wanted to be the go-to guy, the guy that's always getting after it. And as you pick up, whether it's military or business world, eventually you're going to move up to a point where you're not the one actually getting after it. And that was hard for me to realize, is that, oh, I actually don't get to be in the gunfights, to be on the front line. I have to be in the support role, the admin role. And that translation for a lot of people is hard. So they're like, well, this is not what I wanted to be doing. That's primarily the reason why I got out of the military, because I was like, well, now I'm in an admin role. And I didn't see the benefits of being in that till later, which I regret. But at the time I was like, this is not what I wanted to be doing. But
Yeah. Well, and correct me if I'm wrong. This goes into some principles that I know you yourself teach, and definitely your team, of that detachment principle of being able to see that. And what has that done even now, understanding detachment better? And even maybe if you could give some, I want to in a few minutes here get into talking about the FTXs and things you actually observe, but how has that learning detachment helped you? And maybe you could even lay out kind of what you teach in and around detachment.
Yeah, so detachment, we're bringing that back to the core principles at Echelon Front. So they're the laws of combat. So you have cover move, which is essentially teamwork. You have simple, which is talking about kind of your communication, how we're approaching different things. Prioritize and execute, trying to handle too many things at one time. And then decentralized command, which is kind of letting your team have the capacity to make their own decisions on their own, which, as we talked about before, that was my biggest thing. Right. When we're talking about detachment, you're going under prioritize and execute. Because what tends to happen, if I have 12 things going on, I'm getting super overwhelmed. I tend to make like an emotional rash decision. And how often do we make good decisions when we're super amped up or super emotional? It's slim. And so detaching is just all about kind of removing the emotion from the situation and making the logical choice. I mean, you can see this in the military, in business, and in the home world, especially. I see it all the time with my kids. Mm-hmm. I have to detach from the little things that they do, because sometimes they do stuff where I'm like, oh my gosh, and I get so angry, so upset. But making the emotional decision is just going to escalate the situation, rather than being like, okay, he's 2, he doesn't know what he's doing. Like, maybe I should just kind of relax a little bit.
Yeah.
But no, detachment is huge, and I'm glad that I've realized that I definitely need to do a better job of that.
Yeah, no, that's a good illustration to bring it home. It is amazing how quickly maybe in the workplace we might strive and see ourselves going down a bad road, because there's a level of separation between an acquaintance or a coworker or something, but sometimes it takes the smallest little thing for our families to really amp us up and get us going. That's a great illustration of that, 100%. So, well, I'm sure everybody's sitting here thinking, Steve, you gotta ask this guy, how did you get hooked up with Echelon Front? Where did that transition happen?
So I got out of the Marine Corps in 2015, and then I went out to Arizona to go to school to do my bachelor's.
Okay.
Which is where I met my wife. At the time, I wanted to go into law enforcement. That was going to be my backup plan, following in my father's footsteps. Just growing up, listening to the stories at the dinner table was an amazing thing, and so that's what I wanted to do. Then I actually, if anybody knows anything about Echelon Front, JP Donnell, I've known him my whole life. He grew up down the street from me. I think he's like 8 years older than me, so he was the bigger brother. I just have a younger sister, so I didn't have that bigger brother role model in my life. And so that was somebody that I always looked up to, which is funny because when I actually was in high school, JP was in the SEAL teams, and I still have some of the camis that he wore like through his initial training. Yeah. They're in storage somewhere. And so that was somebody that I always looked up to. He actually came to my boot camp graduation down in San Diego. And so I always kind of stayed track, but we were always kind of a little disconnected just from the age and whatnot. I mean, he was in the military. I was still like in 8th grade at the time. But I got out. I was in Arizona, and he actually had an event in Phoenix right down the road from me with Echelon Front. And I hadn't seen him in like eight years. And so we obviously lost contact, and we approached him and my girlfriend at the time, which is my wife now. We went to dinner with him. He started talking about Echelon Front. I'm like, wow. I was like, because I thought like when you get out of the military, like what I've always been told is like nobody owes you anything, like nobody really cares like what you did. And I'm listening to like him translate what he did in the military to like the corporate world. I'm like, whoa, like that's definitely unique. I haven't heard anything about that. Like you get to share military stories and then translate to the business world. That's definitely unique. And so he came out and started talking to me about it. I was like, okay, yeah, that's pretty cool. But I mean, I'm 24, 25 at this time. I kind of have my own agenda. Mm-hmm. Sadly, I kind of blow it off. I graduate college 2 years later. I moved back home, had some family stuff going on, and he's inviting me to come see an FTX, so the field training exercise out in Michigan. And it was always excuses on why I couldn't go out. Well, I mean, some of them are valid. Like my first son was being born. I was graduating college. I was moving back home. Like every time there was always a roadblock. And so he's like, okay, listen, if you can't make it out to the training, he's like, just read the book that Jocko and Leif wrote, Extreme Ownership. If you know anything about Marines, like we suck at reading unless it's like a coloring book or something like that. And so that took me a while. Probably took me like 6 months until I actually picked it up. Like, okay, I guess I owe JP this to read it. And I read and I was like, shoot, I was like, I messed up. Like I need to be a part of this any way that I can. And so late in 2018, they were back in Michigan running the FTX. He's like, listen, just come out. It's for a couple days. Just see what it's about. Just help with the training. And I was literally just in a support role, helping on kind of the bad guy side for the scenarios. And I went out in the first day and hearing JP talk and Jocko and Leif, and I didn't know what to do. I was like, what did I do? Like I blew this opportunity. And from that moment on, I was like, I need to be a part of this any way that I can, support, like I'll do stuff at home, anything. And so I kind of filled the void. There was nobody kind of running the support side for the FTX. I came on a couple more. And then in January 2019, they offered me full time to be a part of the team.
Right on. Well, when you read this book, and obviously you know JP, and you get to have the opportunity to meet these other guys, Jocko and Leif, and Dave Burke was on at that time too. Did he participate in that kind of stuff as well with the FTX, or in terms of your structure? Just some of these teammates of yours now that you're working with. At what point did you feel like you started to actually have extreme ownership in your life? Because obviously the reading it, hearing about it, seeing even how well it works, at what point do you say like, hey, this is actually something that's becoming habit, and it's part of my flow, and it's something I go to? Was that pretty quickly, or did it take somebody like JP constantly speaking into your life and say, hey, while you may be thinking you're taking extreme ownership here, maybe you're not? And that, we're only in 2021. This isn't that long ago. I understand that. And it's a constant growth pattern, but how did that all work? What was that dynamic with these guys? They're high performing dudes that, this stuff is the core of who they are from what I can tell from the outside.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's exactly the point, is that extreme ownership is the core of everybody on the team. And you're right. It's hard initially when you first hear it, because, well, extreme ownership, we always say like it's easy, but it's hard to do. It's hard to implement, because it's actually easier to blame other people and blame other people for your problems. And so at first I'm like, oh yeah, like this sounds really cool, but like, am I going to fully do it? Like, I don't know, like it's actually kind of hard. And it wasn't until my wife, who she read the book too, is she started giving me a hard time. She's like, well, like that's not really extreme ownership. Like, didn't you read the book? And I'm like, shoot. And so that was the first thing. Is like, okay, maybe I should do a better job. But on the Echelon Front side, like those guys never had to like call me out for not doing it. Instead, and what's a way better tactic is they take extreme ownership like to the extreme, to the point where JP would be in Texas and I'm in California having an issue. And he's like, Codey, like that's actually my fault. Like I didn't. And I'm like, what? I was like, you're not even here. Like, how does that even make sense? But he like truly believes that. And everybody on the team, Jocko and Leif too, like everybody on the team takes extreme ownership to the full extent. If they have any kind of piece of the pie, it's their fault. And when you breed that into your culture, it's beautiful, because you have 15 people taking ownership of one piece of the mission, and you know that part's going to get done. And so it was that part, and my wife as well, is when people started taking ownership of what I was doing. And I'm like, wow, I was like, no, this is actually my thing. That's when it kind of was like, okay, I need to get it together. Like, this is all I can control. This is my fault. I need to take better ownership.
Yeah. When again, even coming back into the family, that would be a hard pill to swallow, to have your wife or even a close family member be able to see. It's like, hey, if you're saying this is who you are and saying what you're about, where's the alignment there with these principles? And, that's, I think, for me when things start to change. And you go beyond just the training scenario, because we can stand up and preach principles and tell people, hey, this is best practice, when it may very well be best practice. But until we see the pitfalls of it ourselves, it is difficult to translate it over. So that's pretty cool. What is exactly FTX? I remember when it was starting to pop up in social media and different things that Echelon Front was pushing out, and you'd hear about it from different podcasts and when JP would be on or Jocko talking about it. What exactly is it, and why did it come about? What's the purpose of it?
Gotcha. Yeah. So the FTX has started in 2018. It's definitely a military translation into the Echelon Front world. It's called field training exercise. So in the military, every month, every 2 months, you'd go out to, we call it the field, to a training environment, and you're getting ran through exercises that are whether it's a checklist on are you able to deploy, or you're learning a new skill, whether you're learning to do urban kind of building clearances, or you're doing kind of mountain explorations. Like, these are all different field training exercises to better prepare you for what you're going to experience overseas. And I know in 2018, so before I started, they were kind of looking to get into this field of kind of the hands-on learning, because at Echelon Front, we were doing the workshop, the keynotes, but it's not necessarily like hands-on or overly engaging. And the field training exercise got brought about. JP took that on board, and he's the director of it, of our experiential leadership training. And so what it is in a nutshell, you take all the principles that we teach, you translate it over to a kind of a military scenario-based setup, to where, Steve, you come out with 30 people and you're in charge of all these guys. And I'm going to give you a mission. I'm saying, hey, Steve, at 10:15, you're going to hit building Bravo 4. And that's all you get. And so now you get to plan a military scenario. Sorry, you get to military plan for the scenario, and you get to lead your people on the mission. And so you take your team out, and now you're going against a bunch of my role players, my FTX team. So you're looking at guys that are still in the SEALs teams, guys that have gotten out, Marines, SWAT, like you name it, anybody, like we have the contacts, they're going to come out and support to make our training even better.
Right.
And so at first you're probably not going to succeed, because we know the scenarios, we're kind of pushing the scenarios in a way. But the whole point of this is you guys get to come out into a stressful situation, and it highlights some of the leadership failures that you're going through. And so, yes, you may be going through buildings trying to clear and looking for bad guys, but we translate that to what you're doing in the corporate world, where as a leader that you're kind of making mistakes. We're always tying it back to the laws of combat. So cover, move, simple, prioritize, execute, and decentralized command. So anytime we can get anybody out, like that's ultimately our goal, is to translate what you're messing up at our FTX back to what you're doing at work. And initially, we were doing that for corporate events only. So you get a corporation out in Michigan, you'd have 30 people from that company, they'd come out, we'd come to Michigan, we'd run that FTX. Well, eventually we started to, at the musters, we were talking about the FTXs, we were trying to promote it a little bit. And a lot of times people are coming up to us and saying, well, I only have 5 people, or I just want to come by myself, and we didn't have the capacity to do that. Mm-hmm. And so what we just officially rolled out is the individual FTX. So Steve, you can come out by yourself, or you and 5 of your teammates can come out to an FTX. So our first one is in 10 days out in Dallas, Texas. That one got sold out. That one's FTX 001.
That's awesome.
And then
we
have 002, which is going to be in Miami in July. And then 003 is going to be in St. Louis in September. And so we kind of had this need that we wanted to fill. So JP and myself, we kind of looked individual FTX. It made sense. And so now we're stressing towards that, along with the corporate FTXs. But I mean, I feel, I'm biased, but the FTX is my favorite part of the program because I'm fully engulfed in it.
Yeah.
But it's a good team to be a part of.
Now, I imagine throughout the training, are they single day or are they multiple day events?
It's totally customizable. We've done one 2 weeks in a row with the same company, or you're doing one day where you do
right.
the classroom and the FTX on the same day.
Right on. I imagine that there's probably multiple evolutions that you can see a growth pattern in the people that are there and running these scenarios. What stands out to you as some of the things, if you can, I realize we're generalizing a little bit here, but some of the things that you see from corporate worlds or even law enforcement, first responders that are coming in that maybe like you can say even down to like a checklist, like, hey, when this group comes in, these are some of the problems that are going to jump out really quick as major things that we need to correct. And the reason I bring that up are more on the mindfulness spectrum is people that are thinking about coming to something like you're putting on, or even thinking through their own leadership style where they think, hey, I am a pretty good leader, which I imagine you probably get both ends of those spectrums that come through. Are there things that stand out and be like, man, when you see a group, it's like, man, I know we're going to have to walk through this lesson very early on within it. Is it just all the principles right away, or is there one law of combat that stands out?
I mean, when we first come out, like our first scenario is relatively always the same. It's not like super stressful or anything, but the clients put way more stress on themselves, and it just gets out of hand like drastically to the point where they're shooting unarmed civilians. And it's comical to look at from our perspective, but I don't know if there's necessarily like a glaring one thing that every group does. Because the reality is, like, every situation you have can be solved by leadership. And so the more that we realize that, and the more that we can translate that to our clients, the better off that we're going to be. And so, yeah, sometimes you're dealing with a blue collar group. Maybe it's humility, or you're dealing with a white collar group, and maybe it's just simplifying the communication. So every group is unique, but they always tie back to the same core principles. So I wouldn't necessarily say that there's a silver lining to that everybody's kind of on the same page. Everybody's unique, but they're not so unique that it's different problems.
Interesting. Okay. How did you do the first time you went through an FTX?
Well, so the first time I was on the bad guy team.
Okay.
Unfortunately, well, not unfortunately, it's really fun to be on the bad guy team because you're in control of yourself. So there's five. It's pretty much like 5 versus 30. Like that could be a fair fight, but at the beginning, it's not. Like, we know what we're doing. Like, with the military background and law enforcement background, it kind of goes south for the corporation side. But at first, I was just getting super sucked into my own thing. Like, I just wanted to kill as many people as I wanted to, and that's not what it's about. But it wasn't until I started to hear the debriefs, because so after each run, you bring your team out. It's like a 15-minute run, and then we come back and debrief after every single run. So some days you get like 6 to 7 runs, but the majority of the time is spent on the debriefs. And so just listening to people talk about the problems that they're having and then tying it into the scenarios that they're going through, it's mind-boggling to see them connect the dots. But it's usually not till like after lunch, because at the beginning of the day, people are getting caught up in the tactics, how to clear a building, how to handle threatening civilians. But in the back end of the day, we're focused on tying it back to what you do. And to hear people talk about like, oh, well, on this scenario, I was letting my guys kind of run rampant and not checking in on them. Like, I actually see that where I'm failing at work. And I really want to do a better job because I'm failing as a leader for my team back at work. And just to hear people connect the dots, I'm like, wow, it's like we have something special here that people connect the dots. And then eventually, like, we even get to the point where people reach back out like 6 months, a year later, they're like, look, what I learned was something that I didn't think that I was going to get from the FTX, but my work environment has drastically changed for the better. And I'm thankful for what you guys put us through. So just to hear that, reinforcing that what we're doing is working, that has been a beautiful thing.
Yeah, man, that's awesome. That's cool. And I'm sure whether you get to hear about it or don't get to hear about it, when these guys are going back to their businesses and companies and whatever the place may be, just having your eyes opened to ask bigger questions about your leadership style. And that's something that really stands out about all of the books that have come out, and just the different trainings that I myself have started to jump into that you guys have going on. It's just when you can get to a place to begin to ask a question about how you're doing with certain things and realizing that it's okay, I guess, that you're failing. And that realization is really important. And to be able to walk people through, and, you know, even the other day, the hour training that you all put on for first responders, I had multiple guys in my organization reach out and be like, dude, it's like that simple, just hearing a couple principles, and then you get to go attack those problems and try and just evaluate how you're doing is really important, and it's part of the messaging that I love that comes out of Echelon Front and what you're doing. Now, for you personally, what type of system and strategies have you put in place for yourself? I know you're huge into fitness from what I can see that you're posting, and just your past that you spoke about earlier. Even like, what kind of routines and things do you have in place to help keep you on the path that, hey man, when I have tough days, I know I need to execute on these things. This is my daily grind that I need to accomplish, and the satisfaction of getting through those things. I'm sure the listeners and audience would love to hear, you know, a young guy like yourself, the things that you're doing and accomplishing while working with this incredible team that you're fortunate to be a part of. And you know, we all look up to those guys as well. But what have you changed, and what are you doing?
For me, it's all about kind of planning my week, planning my day out. I look in my room and I have 3 whiteboards here, stuff that's camera-based, stuff that's like weekly, and stuff that's on the calendar year. And so I personally need to have stuff written down to where I can physically go in and check the box that I did A, B, or C. And what that all is stemming to is accountability. And I think the hardest thing in the world is to be able to hold yourself accountable, because it's easier to be lax and it's easier to let things slide. Like, procrastination. I'm going to get to that next week. And so what I found to be most beneficial is accountability, is reaching out to those that are closely tied to you to hold you accountable. And so my wife, she holds me accountable all the time. At first it was super frustrating, because she would be like, okay, did you do this? Did you do this? And I'm like, no. I was like, I got it. Don't worry about it. She's like, no, you actually need to get it done. And like, we have a strong enough relationship where I've told her, like, listen, you need to call me out if I'm not getting stuff done, or if I'm not supporting you, if I'm not listening to you, helping with you, you need to tell me. And so we have our relationship strong enough to where we can hold each other accountable. And that even stems not into my work life, but being a father and like the fitness side of my world as well. My wife's name's Paige. She'll come in. She's like, listen, you need to go work out. Like, you need to go. Like, she knows like that's my stress relief. Yeah. When I start to get heated and kind of angry with the kids, she's like, just go in the garage. And that's why I love having a garage gym, because I don't really have an excuse. It's 10 steps away from me, and then I can go and do that. And so I try to hold myself accountable. My wife holds me accountable. And then the guys at work too, we're doing kind of weekly checks Monday and Friday, to where my initial team and then everybody on the team is getting together and everybody's holding each other accountable. I think it's hugely successful when you can build that into your environment.
Yeah. Do you feel that your team at work, those checks, when you check in, do you feel like people can be pretty vulnerable, and you hear some things that guys are willing to share because you have developed a cohesiveness? Or do you feel it just becomes very routine, like, hey, we got our check-ins, hey, I'm good. How have you guys built the ability to be vulnerable and check each other on things?
I mean, it's all stemming to the relationships that you've built. So if you don't have a strong relationship, I'm not going to be able to hold you accountable or have that hard conversation. And so everybody on the team realized that at day one, as Jocko and Leif preach, relationships are paramount in everything that we do. And so I've been constantly building a relationship with anybody and everybody in the organization, so that when I am slacking or if I'm making a mistake, they can just be like, hey, Codey, you need to kind of fix this up a little bit. I'm like, okay, cool. Because I know that they're saying that from a good place. They're not saying it to kind of just knock me down a peg. Like, they truly want me to be successful. And that's what I've noticed most about everybody in the organization, especially Jocko and Leif. Like, they want everybody on the team to be successful. So when they give you a critique or they're trying to help you, it's from a good place. Because here's the thing. If I win, Echelon Front runs. And so when I realized that, I'm like, okay. And so now I can start to take that criticism, what I'm doing wrong, and I can take it with some context. I'm like, oh, actually Leif just wants me to do better on whatever I'm doing. Like, okay, check, Roger boss, I'm going to get it done. And so having that stable foundation, that stable relationship, that's going to be key for when you have to hear kind of the criticisms that we're going to get.
Awesome. Very good. With your working out, do you do everything just gym? You just have a routine, or do you compete at all? How do you adapt and change? I know that's something you said you loved.
Yeah, so I've transitioned. I've done everything under the moon. I didn't really realize like what I was training for. I met somebody the other day, and somebody asked him like what his programming was, and he was like, I want to be able to do anything that anybody brings to the gym. So if any of my friends come to me and they're like, I want to go run a marathon, like I want to be able to do, I'm like, shoot. I was like, okay, that's actually what I want to do. That's what I love to do. My gym's always open. I have friends still from high school, from when I was a kid, that live in the area. And if anybody comes to my gym, it's, hey, what do you want to do today? You want to go bike? You want to go hike? You want to run, lift weights, CrossFit, like jiu-jitsu, whatever you want to do, let's do it. And so that's my ultimate goal, is if anybody comes over, they want to do something I've never done before, I at least want to be able to hang.
Yeah. Right on. Yeah, no, right on. So it maybe in that vein, maybe it's not like, what has your attention? Like, I know you're busy with the family, you got stuff going on at work, but is there anything in this season of life you're in that you're just really focused on and like has your attention, whether it's a hobby or whether it's like, what are you pouring yourself into when you can?
Right now I'm kind of pouring myself into CrossFit.
Okay.
And the reason is because it's extremely difficult. There's a lot of I look at it, I'm like, oh, that's kind of easy. And then I'll do it. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like, why is that so hard? It looks so simple.
Yeah.
And that's what I love about that environment, is there's always somebody or something that I'm not able to do or accomplish. And I'm like, okay, now I want to do it. And so that's kind of right now with the kids and whatnot. We're pushing into sports a little bit. We're trying to, I mean, they have a really short attention span. So a day trying to play baseball has turned into going to throw rocks and do other stuff. But, trying to get them involved with whatever we got going on. My family's big into sports. My wife and I love baseball. I love all sports. So baseball season's coming. So I'm excited for that.
Heck yeah. Yeah. Hopefully. I mean, is it looking like you guys will probably start to slowly have more access and things open up out there in California? You'll be able to do some of these things, or you don't know yet?
I don't really know. California is not in my good gracious. We're actually in the works. I'm moving over to Texas eventually. I grew up here. When I got out of the military, I moved back here. This has always been my home, but I think we need a change of scenery. I think Texas is on the horizon for us.
Hey, there you go. That's pretty cool. Yeah, right now I'm scheduled to come out to San Diego in the summer, and I'm just hoping that actually happens. It's hard to say, but as we wind down a little bit here, would you talk a little bit about this first responder training that EF Online is putting? It is through EF Online, correct? That is the main thruster. I don't want to misspeak there. Would you just speak to that a little bit, because it is really powerful for those guys that are starting, either have been or looking to connect with Echelon Front?
Yes, sir. So yeah, initially with Echelon Front, we kind of had like all your in-person stuff, and then COVID hit. As we talked before, we transitioned everything online. And so Jocko and Leif, great idea, great concept. Hey, we're going to push all online. It's called Echelon Front Online. And so you can do the workshops, you can do the keynotes. We have a thing on there called the Brigade, where everybody that signed on to Echelon Front Online, you get to talk with each other and kind of bank off each other's experience and knowledge and where you're coming from, submitting questions that gets answered by the Echelon Front team and other people in the Brigade. And so we're doing all that. And I know something that Jocko and Leif wanted to get into a long time ago was into the first responder world. And sadly enough, we never kind of got into that space because, well, I mean, we're trying to grow as a company. We're relatively small, and we're trying to reach out to all these different kind of environments, I guess you could say. And so first responder took a back seat for a little bit, just based on manpower. And so this year with all the online stuff, it was like, okay, well, why don't we try to do kind of a first responder session? And it actually stemmed from another colleague of mine, Jamie Cochran. She started a women's assembly. So this is free to everybody. any woman can sign up, and it's Echelon Front based, but it's just strictly women only. And so they get to talk about stuff that's related to work, at home life, the balance and everything like that, and then tying it back to Echelon Front.
Right on.
So I saw that and I was like, okay, well, why can't we do that for first responders? So what we do is right now it's once, maybe twice a month. We have an online call, a Zoom meeting just like this. It's an hour long, and it's open to any and all first responders. So you don't need to be a part of EF Online. If you want to sign up later, you can, but it's not necessary. I want this to get out to every single first responder that I can reach. That's my goal. I mean, we started off, the first one had less than 100 people. I know last iteration we had close to 750. Mm-hmm. So it's growing, which is mostly stemmed from word of mouth from people that are on the training, which I'm thankful for. So we're trying to push that kind of out more and to see how many more people we can grab back to our training.
Yeah, right on. Well, I want to give some space. Could you talk a little bit about EF Online, what's involved in that, and the different, I guess, pieces of that people can engage in should they sign up to be a part of that leadership training?
Yes, sir. So yeah, on EF Online, so you have every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, you're getting an hour Zoom session from Jocko, Leif, and the team. Not every session is Jocko and Leif. Majority of them they want to be a part of every single session, which is awesome to see. And it opens up with a topic, simple as topics stemming from the books, or it's just topic of the day, like stuff that we've incorporated in the past throughout the military. And then they open up for 40, 35 minutes of Q&A. And so anybody and everybody can directly contact Jocko, Leif, Echelon Front, and the guys and ask certain questions from whatever background you come from. It doesn't really necessarily have to be a corporation problem or business problem. It can just be a leadership problem that you're having at home, having with your kids. The questions are just they're everywhere. And so it's awesome to see handling questions that way. So that's every Monday, Wednesday, Friday. And then you also have the foundation courses, which Leif, he's a big component of this. He's been building these courses that stem from the book. So you're diving into cover move, what that looks like. And Jocko and Leif are talking about what they wrote about in the book and why they wrote about it. Mm-hmm. And then eventually you're getting into kind of a question part at the end, where a knowledge check to make sure that you understand what you're going through. And then you get a little certificate after you complete all courses. I believe we have 12 new ones that just popped up, which is going to continually grow on to more courses and whatnot. So those are awesome. Those are about sometimes an hour, hour and a half, but it's good knowledge. And you get to watch people like role play, certain scenarios on like how to de-escalate an aggressive coworker, and to see Jocko and Leif do that on camera, you're like, wow, it's like I really need to step my game up. That's a huge component there. You have the brigade, which I talked about earlier, where you get to interact with everybody on the platform, just banking off other people's knowledge base and where they're coming from. You can watch pre-release recorded stuff. I mean, the list goes on and on. It's a great tool for anybody in the business world, anybody in a leadership position, or anybody wanting to be in a leadership position. If you're just in charge of yourself, like what better way to get better at leadership than to engulf in kind of a leadership style programming as such with EF Online.
Yeah, right on, man. No, I encourage anybody to take a look at it. And what about yourself? What's the future look like in terms of visioning for yourself? I know you probably have all your different smaller things, but where do you see yourself and wanting to be a part of, and wanting your legacy and messaging to be as you grow as in the business world with Echelon Front, and also just as a father and a husband?
Man, that's a tough question. I think in short, on the Echelon Front side, trying to build this first responder, these sessions as big as we can. What we're looking to do this year is having some in-person actual first responder sessions where people can come, and it's directly to what they want to do. So I'm in charge of those. I'm trying to get the ball rolling and kind of pick up speed on that. But I mean, my goal is just to touch as many first responders as I can. Coming from my father being in the police force and just knowing what he's been through and just being able to help any way that we can, like that's my goal. I know that I can't be a police officer right now with what I do at Echelon Front, or I can't be a firefighter. Eventually down the road, that's what I would like to do, is to be in some capacity, police, fire, and then working at Echelon Front. That way I can relate anything that I do over to the Echelon Front side. That's my goal down the road. On a personal side, I mean, I'm just every day trying to be a better father, husband, any way that I can. And all that just stems down to conversations that I have with my wife. Is I tie everything back to everything that we've talked about today, and it's accountability. Is the things that we put out, like for our New Year's resolution, we're not saying the typical stuff that, oh, I need to get back into the gym. Like me and my wife sat down, we wrote down stuff with, okay, in order to be a better father this year, I need to do A, B, and C. And so we have those metrics and we share that with each other, and we're able to relay back to that, like, okay, well, what have you done for this? What have you done for that? And so that accountability piece is a huge thing. I can't harp on it enough, but that's ultimately my goal, is just trying to raise these kids as best I can. It's definitely a blast. It's challenging. We're definitely outnumbered right now. You say we want one more, so who knows?
Oh man, you said it. So
yeah, it's probably gonna come true now.
No doubt, it's out there. The pressure's on. No, that's good, man. Well, how does the audience connect with you, Codey?
So you can either go to echelonfront.com, on the corporate side, that's where everything is. Any first responders out there looking for the training, our next training is on March 30th. We're starting to bring special guests on to each iteration. Last one we had Chief Roger Shai from Pocatello Police Department. So we're looking to get more guests on that. So that can be found on the Echelon Front website as well. Sadly, I'm only on Instagram. I only have 2 hands and I have 3 kids. So I had to pick one social media source. And it's just Codey.Gandy on Instagram. Sadly, I spell my name weird, so I often get overlooked. It's C-E-Y. But I've had to live with that my whole life.
Hey, don't forget the E, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's awesome, man. No, I appreciate you taking the time out today, and maybe we'll get the chance in the future to dive into some of these other topics. I realize we kind of did a 30,000-foot view of some of these things, but I just commend you on making the transition and what you're doing, and thank you for having a heart for the first responder community and getting that word out. And there's more training is needed every day as we try and lead our communities better, lead our families better. I appreciate you just putting out the positive stuff, even what you can get out on social media, because it speaks volumes of what you're trying to do, right? We're not perfect, but we need to ask better questions and be better. So, man, kudos to you, and I appreciate you taking this time from your busy schedule, and thanks to your family for letting you step away on a Saturday here so we can have this conversation and get it out to people, because it's what I so desperately want to get out. And I learn as much from these conversations as I hope the audience gets out of these. So thank you for taking the time today, brother.
No, absolutely. I appreciate you having me. I'm thankful for what you're doing and the message you're trying to get out. I think it's awesome. The more people that get to listen to you and your guests, I think it's only going to make the world a better place.
Hey, thanks, brother. We'll be in touch.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much.